What made you get into this?
I enjoy it, I guess. That's the best thing I could say. It's something I've done other things. I've worked for large corporations and not so large, and always kind of knew I was hoping that I would be my own boss someday. So now I go to bed with my problems and wake up with them. I'm smaller than the guppies that are in this pond in the big picture, really small, and that's fine. I'm not out to be the biggest farmer. I'm more concerned with just being a quality farmer. You know, if we think that we're smarter than nature and that we can outsmart her, I'll promise you this, that we're fools.
First of all, we're feeding the products of an infant science that's prone to side effects to the entire population. And we're releasing them into the environment where they can interact with the entire ecosystem, and we can't recall them. So it's a infant technology being deployed that can affect everyone who eats, all living beings, and all future generations.
There are no long-term feeding studies that are required. There are no studies on the potential impact on human fetal development, on birth defects. There really is very little science backing up the claims by the industry that these are the most thoroughly tested food technologies ever developed. It's just simply not true.
If the benefits are accrued to a group of individuals, say certain kinds of biotech companies or maybe very large agricultural farms, while others are exposed to even relatively low risks, but who feel like they have no power to control that, they may perceive that as unjust. So having one group exposed to risks for the benefit of another, even if the benefits outweigh the risks, may be seen as highly problematic. And in fact, one of the things that's complicated about the food system that we have in this country is how segmented it is. So you've got companies that make seeds, like Pioneer, which is owned by DuPont, which might make the seeds, and they sell to the farmers. The farmers grow crops, which they sell to a food producer who might produce food, who sells it to somebody who gets further down in the manufacturing process, who then sells it to a food company that sells it to a grocery store that sells it to a person. That's a very long segment chain, and at each stage of the process, the customer for each part of the food chain is just thinking about the next part of the food chain. So Pioneer and DuPont, they're just thinking about the farmers who are going to buy their products. Monsanto's just thinking about the farmers who are going to buy their products. They're not necessarily thinking about the downstream users.
And so when you see corn, you see atrazine and Roundup. And with the genetically modified seeds, the farmers are being encouraged to use a seed that is weed killer resistant, and so they will use more pesticides in exchange for this pesticide resistant corn. It's not a bad idea as an industry deal. It sort of reminds me of giving you a disease and then having the only cure. I'll give you corn that you can simultaneously spray with weed killer, and it's resistant to that. It doesn't mind. But the whole concept of killing your way to victory, I think we've learned it doesn't work in Afghanistan, and it really doesn't work in sustainable farming.
There are health concerns about the effect of genetically modified ingredients, and people don't know what they're eating. And many people probably might make a decision not to eat the foods that they're buying if they knew they contain genetically modified ingredients. Maybe they would still eat it anyways, but at least if they knew, they could study it and make their own decision.
This is about being informed. Consumers have a right to know what's in the food we're eating and feeding our kids. We're the ones that have the right to decide, the right to choose what we eat. It's not up to these companies or the government to decide for us what we get to know about our food. And people want to know about genetic engineering. 90% of people in the United States in poll after poll say yes, genetically engineered food should be labeled.
The USDA statistics and others show that it increases the use of agricultural chemicals, about 529 million pounds over the first 16 years of herbicide. We know that it doesn't increase yield. We know that it doesn't increase average farmer profit. What it does increase is profit for the biotech industry.
And, America government is influencing other countries to accept GM crops, because they want to support their local industry, right? Let's support America. Let's support Monsanto. So, which is a noble idea, if you don't consider the health consequences of what they're doing. So if their strength is here in the U.S., and you make them face the reality about it here, that's going to take a lot of that economic clout away to try to force the rest of the world into genetically modified crops.
And another thing, who are we really being controlled by? I have to look at my own family. My grandparents came from Europe around the 1890s, first to the United States. Both my parents were born in the United States, went up to Canada. Why did they leave Europe? They left Europe because they were under control, barons and dukes and lords, and they couldn't do what they wanted farming. Now we've come 100 years, we're made full circles, not controlled by lords and barons, but now by the seed and chemical companies and corporations. That's who we're controlled. We've lost our freedom. And that's one of the reasons my wife and I are standing up to this. We've seen what has happened to our parents and grandparents in Europe. And now we're having the same thing we're leaving that legacy now to our children and grandchildren.
I think we can kind of look ahead, and or I put it a different way, I think that future historians will look back on our time and write not about how many pounds of pesticide we do or don't apply. What they'll write about is how willing we are to sacrifice our children and jeopardize future generations just for this massive experiment that we call genetic engineering that's based on failed promises, flawed science, just to benefit the bottom line of a commercial enterprise.